San Francisco, California, and the Rolling Stones are in town. They've been touring for almost 2 years continuously, but that doesn't stop this gig, like all the others, from being a complete sellout.
I mean, he defined being a pop singer star like Mick was the singer.
Mick Jagger is an athlete. He's got the body of a marathon runner. He's got the flexibility of an acrobat. He's the face of a Renaissance thug. He has the mind of a sniper. I think all these things added together with the fact that he's a wonderful songwriter and has got an extraordinary voice. It's kind of how can you lose unless you self-destruct? And Mick hasn't self-destructed.
He's a great entertainer, great entertainer. He's electricity on the stage.
They are the archetypal performing rock band. I mean, quite simply, the best rock and roll band in the world. They were then, they still are now.
What makes the current show so incredible in a way is the fact that there is a tour at all. As they enter their 5th decade on the road, Keith's brushes with mortality are legendary. Just as remarkable is the enthusiasm and attention to detail that Jagger still brings to staging these extravaganzas. And of course, then there is his total domination of the event as the master performer.
The big challenge really is to, that you know if you're playing these very big shows, I'm talking about the bigger shows, that you've got to entertain people to a certain extent because that's what I think makes those big shows work, that you want to have great sound, you want to have a really good performance of the band, you want to have some, things that people can sort of, take home in their heads.
I think it's pure theatre. It's like a festival. To me, when I go to see a Rolling Stones show at Wembley Arena, what you're actually looking at is the whole conception and what he has looked at and evolved with the video screens, the lights, the fireworks, and all the rest of it. It has nothing to do with the group performing on the stage and everything to do with the event. And when he goes on tour, he changes. He changes into this different character. And when he comes off for some hours, he's still the same creature that he was on the stage. But it's something that he has created, rather like that Frankensteinian monster.
But why does Mick Jagger continue to run? He's more wealth than he can spend in what lifetime he has left. He has enough female adoration to satisfy the appetite of a football team, and has already contributed enough music to rock's eternal scrapbook of hits to have guaranteed his seat at the table of the all-time greats. But something drives him on. One clue might exist in his darkest hour, and that too took place in San Francisco.
Altamont is this bleak, horrible gray or brown field. It's not attractive, it's painful, it's surrounded by ugly rednecks, and among other people in those days. And the police are not friendly, and the ground is just ugly.
On December the 6th, 1969, Paul Kantner's Jefferson Airplane came to Altamont to join the Stones for a hastily planned free concert. But the dream of a peaceful festival was to turn into a nightmare.
It was the largest concert ever held.
All of our expectations were that it was going to be sort of a love fest, if anything,
There was somebody being abused far beyond reason, and nobody was doing anything about it.
The violence and all that took place.
Marty got hit there.
I remember sort of walking through a crowd of people, and somebody tried to actually punch Mick.
So many reports came out later on to the effect that it was the very music and the lyrics, the satanic nature of it, that caused the violence. I think the two ran parallel with one another.
You're never really in control. I mean, you think you are, but you're not.
And Mick really looked scared, the poor little lad. I felt sorry for him on the stage there in his silly little Satan outfit. And there's big, like 6 to 8 feet Hell's Angels standing around in their leathers and chains and whips and everything else. I have to say, he was a little out of his element there. Altamont was a unique experience in survival, I think.
As Mick sang Sympathy for the Devil, the decade of peace and love came to a grisly end, as a member of the audience was stabbed and then beaten to death by Hell's Angels.
He and the other guys, all of them, were certainly very deeply affected by that.
Altamont set the tone for the Stones' tours of the 80s and 90s. Never again would Mick trust to others what he could organize for himself. The roadshow became an event. The event was built around Mick. He would provide the danger, the excitement, the killer moments, not the audience. There are 2 other clues as to what drove him on to conquer the logistics of rock and roll: class and ambition. His background holds the key. The birth of the Stones' music was 1,000,000 miles away from the murder and mayhem of Altamont. It had its roots in the deep south of London. The legendary meeting between Mick and Keith took place on a Dartford railway platform, as Mick waited patiently for the up train to college, and Keith, characteristically, nearly missed his connection. Under Mick's arm was a collection of blues records, the hobby of a middle-class grammar school boy from Kent.
Well, I think Mick has always been a social climber. I mean, Mick has always been middle class. I mean, Mick comes from a background that wasn't working class, street gutter kind of things that he'd sort of like assumed at times that were useful to the persona, to the on-stage persona. I mean, Mick was the son of Basil Fanshawe Jagger, for God's sake, who was a headmaster. Basil Fanshawe Jagger, you know, I mean, you know, we are not talking about Sid Vicious here.
Our parents came out of that war with a hope for the future, that anything is possible now for our children, and we're going to give them every chance that we can. So we were put in schools. Relatively a lot of money was given to children, children's education, and we were exposed to any number of influences. The world was opening up. You know, the birth control and the pill in the 50s, Playboy magazine, sexuality things breaking down.
Mick was from basically a middle-class background, but he, I think, wanted something more than the rest of the guys in the Stones. He was more interested in the future, whereas Brian and Keith just wanted to party.
The other driving force, of course, behind Jagger is given away by the almost religious zeal with which he collected those early blues records, and the fact that on almost every tour when the Stones first headlined, they hired a top blues artist for support. The blues was what first stimulated the young Mick Jagger and brought him into contact with fellow musicians like Brian Jones from Cheltenham and Paul Jones, who himself would become a chart-topping vocalist.
I started, in common with most people of my generation, and this includes Mick, listening to skiffle. Lonnie Donegan has a lot to answer for, including the fact that all those people like Eric Clapton and so on picked up guitars. I think it would be early 1962. Alexis Corner and Cyril Davis moved the base of their operations out to Ealing. And there would be people who actually had the same records that you had. They had to, because those are the only ones you could get. You could start in those days to get chess records, sometimes on import.
England was definitely the first country where white kids had interest in the electric blues and just the blues in general. And of course, the Rolling Stones got their name from Muddy Waters' record Rolling Stone, and did Bo Diddley songs right away. I mean, I think they were trying to sound like the original artists. So I think, yes, the blues and chess records was probably very important to them.
At the Ealing Club, Brian Jones was trying to put together the band that would eventually become the Stones. He needed a vocalist, but Mick wasn't first choice.
Brian said at that stage, look, I don't really want to be in any band unless I'm the leader of it. So I said, well, you'll have to form your own. And he actually rang me and he said, I am going to move to London. I am going to form a band and I'm going to get rich and I'm going to get famous. He said, do you want to be the lead singer? He said, and I'm getting Keith to play the other guitar. And I said, look, Brian, I don't think that we'll ever make enough money from this music that you and I love so much to make a living, much less to get rich. And in any case, I've just got a job with a dance band in Slough. Anyway, he got Mick. But as far as Brian was concerned, it was his band, you know. And he did the hiring and the letting go as well.
Around the nucleus of Brian Jones in a smoky West End club in 1962, the Stones were formed. An Eastern European entrepreneur decided to move the club out of town and set up the Stones as resident band.
So I decided to go as far as I could from the marquee to open a place that would prove to everyone that it didn't matter where you went in metropolitan London. If you got the end of an underground line, people would come for this music. That's why I went to Richmond.
I've always found it kind of strange that Richmond became such a centre for so many musicians. I mean, there was us, the Stones, The Who, Clapton. We all frequented Richmond. I guess it had a lot of Victorian buildings. You could get flats cheaply. It had the Auberge coffee shop. It was a mecca, I guess, for middle-class boys.
Brian Jones was always bending my ear about giving them a break. So I decided I would give them a break. The first gig was very famous. 3 people there were. Incredible. The magic sort of worked, the idea of just playing out into empty space, but somehow calling the spirits together. In a very short time, we had people lining up outside the Station Hotel in the back entrance at 1 o'clock in the afternoon to come in at 7 o'clock for this kind of almost ritualistic procedures that the Stones' appearances became there. People were hanging from rafters. I mean, we sort of encouraged all that because people didn't know how to react to this music. So there was this kind of ritualistic stuff happening, this app-reactive, this sort of purging, this sort of like, Dionysian, bacchanalian in a way, driven by bitter beer, alcohol definitely, because nobody was doing anything else. I'm gonna tell you how it's gonna be.
You're gonna give your love to me. The Stones certainly were the first band to be, I think, to be truly electrified, and that sort of smooth rhythmic sound. They had packaged it in such a way that it was fabulous. I mean, they had this rhythm, they were sexually exciting, they could hold an audience from the beginning of the show to the end. I mean, they had charisma, most definitely, at that early stage. And they had an image, which was very interesting, too. I mean, in some ways, Mick Jagger, sort of still is doing the same things on stage. I mean, it was a sort of shock. I mean, we had probably more reverence to blues music, but Mick did it in his own way. I mean, the sort of maracas shaking, the hand actions. I mean, we'd never seen anything like that.
Well, they wanted to sound just like the original Black records, but it didn't come out that way. It came out like the Rolling Stones, and they found that they had an audience that appreciated that, and it developed from there.
We used to go and look at acts in clubs, and we went to the Crawdaddy on a Sunday night. It was in a sweaty little place, filled to the brim with people, and they were absolutely extraordinary. Brian was very much the leader. Mick was the singer, but Brian was the leader, yeah.
I just wanna make love to you. No, Brian Jones was definitely the mind, so to speak, And he was also older than the others, except for Bill Wyman, who was older than anybody.
So what happened was the Stones eventually got a record deal, because you have to understand that in those days you could only do clubs probably in a small area. You needed to go national. So I think they got a record deal on Decca, and they just did a song called Come On.
He's maybe borrowed, because most of us do, but he's given a lot. I heard him do many of the tunes that was made popular by blacks, but he made them more popular. They talked about the people that they listened to, for example, like Muddy Waters and Chuck Berry and many of the other people. And I think each time that they did this, it opened many doors for people in rock and roll as well as we guys in the blues.
They are really genuinely into blues music and into the history of blues music. One of the things I always liked about them during those early tours was that they always made a point of having people like Ike and Tina Turner or B.B. King or Stevie Wonder on the same bill, which was great for them because in those days it was their first opportunity to play to a predominantly white audience.
They did allow me to tour with them. I toured with them on the first big American tour. I was on the show, and I've toured with them since then. Not only did I tour with them since then, I was lucky enough to record a tune with the Rolling Stones. So all of that have helped B.B. King.
Pretty soon, Richmond's Crawdaddy and Twickenham's Eel Pie Island couldn't contain the Stones fans or the band's ambitions. But with the change in their fortunes came a change of management that totally transformed the way that the world saw the Stones, and in particular, Mick Jagger. Ask any fan, and they will tell you that Mick Jagger is the leader of the Rolling Stones. But it hasn't always been that way. In 1963, Andrew Oldham was set to be the most glittering wheeler dealer in London's music scene. Having worked for the Beatles manager Brian Epstein, he now set his sights on the Stones, certain that they were going to be the next big thing.
Andrew Oldham and I had started out as independent PR guys. We were the terrible kids on the block. And one night he said to me, it was a Sunday, he said, we're going to see a blues band in Eel Pie Island, and I'm going to make the singer a star. He did. It was Mick.
My father died, so I had to go to Switzerland. So I was away for quite a while. And when I came back, what had happened was that Andrew had penetrated the entire scene and seen the Stones as an opportunity for him to have some kind of a voice in chapter on the scene that was going. Years later, I found out one of the reasons why they decided to go sign with Andrew and do me in was because I was a foreigner. You know? How could they trust a sort of strange guy with an accent like this to you know, I was not an Englishman, you know. I wasn't an Englishman. The scene is what mattered to me. I mean, I was more politically inclined than most people, but I felt that the artists should be the owner of their work and not the music publishers and the record companies.
The first meeting in the office with the Stones was Brian, because Brian was the leader of the band. And after a couple of meetings with Brian, I said to Andrew, I said, you know, this guy, he's not capable. He's not coherent. Andrew had no time for Brian at all, could not take him because he couldn't relate to him. And also because he was 101% fixed. Mick Jagger is the star. Forget the bands, forget everything, groups, what have you. This is a star, a megastar.
Stones started to come on the show, and that was when Mick began to take over, and it became Mick and Brian and Keith, and it began to balance itself out more. But having said all of that, you can't discount Andrew, who was the manager and was absolutely on top of everything and would sort of wheel and deal.
By 1964, after getting his former charges the Beatles to give the Stones their first #1 hit with I Wanna Be Your Man, Oldham now focused on world domination. It was his masterstroke to create in the public's mind the image of the Stones as the mirror image of the Beatles, but it was an image that matched their brightness with darkness, their homely genius with brooding menace.
Once Andrew had lit the blue touch paper, there was no stopping Mick. Whatever task Andrew set Mick would do. We were in Berlin in this concert. It's the famous German concert, and we looked out and you realise the audience was basically male. And as Mick is dancing from side to side of the stage, Andrew said to him, goose step back across the stage. So Mick would then take it one further. Instead of goose stepping, he raised his right arm. And the most frightening thing is the audience stood up and saluted him. And that's the night they wrecked the cars and people were injured. And concerts weren't allowed in Berlin for, what, another 25 years. In the beginning, Mick, I think, was very amused by the dream or the story that Andrew sold him. And then suddenly, as the fame started, he got caught on the fame train. But he got caught in it in a way that he really enjoyed it and realised that he could make it bigger and bigger. And Andrew realised to get this greater anti-feeling, anti-establishment feeling, we had to do something quite phenomenal. And it had to be a front-page story. And none of us knew how to get it until we get a phone call one night that Bill Wyman's been arrested for urinating in a petrol station. Within minutes, Andrew and I are now selling the story anonymously to the different press associations and turned it into Mick Jagger arrested. And of course then it was splashed across the front pages. And at the same time then Mick fell for the story that, that Andrew sold him, right, here's the scam and you're going to go along with this. Would you let your daughter marry a Rolling Stone? I mean, it was a double-page spread in the NME. But it caused so many reverberations. I mean, the Nationals picked it up. And it was a thing that they lived with, or Mick lived with, for a long time.
Part of the Stones' inner circle was photographer Garrett Mankiewicz, who saw at first hand Mick's rise to prominence in the band.
Mick was, without doubt, the leader of the band on stage. He manipulated and controlled audiences with extraordinary skill, even at that time. He was able to bring an audience up off their seats, to bring them to a pitch, to calm them down, to get them up again. He was really a marvelous controller of audiences. It was quite clear that Mick was the centre. He did seem to coordinate things. Their image had already evolved. They'd abandoned the idea of suits. The Stones represented a much more individual look, a much more, believe it or not, rebellious sort of look. This is the shot that was to become the cover for Out of Our Heads or December's Children, depending upon which country you bought it in. It sort of seems to have caught the group at this particular period in time really well. This is the famous Cage picture, but as you can see from the whole sheet of contacts, there were only 4 shot in the Cage itself, and I only moved in for 2 of them. So it just goes to show you how one picture can really stand out and appear to be so planned and contrived, and yet actually it was pretty much thrown away at the time.
Well, what I liked about the Stones, and Mick Jagger in particular, was that it was everything the Beatles weren't. I mean, these were guys who were bad boys, whereas the Beatles seemed to be good boys. And it was a lot easier to identify with these rather bohemian sort of London types rather than the sort of fluffy dolls that the Beatles had become in their neat little jackets and quaint haircuts and all the rest of it. So it was polarised into those who liked the Beatles and those who went for the Stones.
As the Beatles did something, I wouldn't say that the Stones would copy it, but I think the Stones saw a space and then they made it their own.
You know, when you think of Rock and Roll Circus and Magical Mystery Tour, it sort of delineates really the 2 different styles of the bands. So yes, there were 2 very distinct camps, although there was one person who continually went between the 2 of them. That was a man called Robert Fraser.
As the 60s progressed, the apparent gap between the groups seemed to grow. When the Beatles launched an album, it was an artistic event. When the Stones launched Beggar's Banquet, it swiftly became an exercise in pie throwing. The problem Mick faced was that as a symbol of rebellion, he was now set on a collision course with the establishment.
Mick Jagger will face charges along with Robert Frazier, a London art gallery owner.
A national newspaper had tipped off the police to raid Keith Richards' house at West Wittering. In the house were found traces of cannabis resin and a pipe in which cannabis had been smoked. Evidence that an unnamed naked woman was sitting on a sofa with a rug around her was given in court today.
Well, it's been a fantastic day. There were perhaps a dozen of us, and we'd been out tripping around the countryside on Selsey Bill, having a great time. And we were sitting around. Mick had just been given a new television. We didn't have a programme on. We had the thing between the channels, just looking at the dots, which was fascinating. Suddenly, we saw coming out of the shadows strangely dressed we thought they were human beings, but they turned out to be the police. They insisted on searching people and people's rooms. The establishment wanted to get them, and this was it. They had got them, and they wanted to try and make their charges stick.
The court case and subsequent publicity merely enlarged Jagger's image as bad, possibly mad, and dangerous to know. But the drugs experience was taking its toll on Brian Jones. Oldham's closeting together of Mick and Keith as a songwriting machine to rival Lennon and McCartney merely widened the chasm.
They were really searching for new experiences and new things and new intellectual, musical, creative, cultural highs, and they were really going for it. I think it was Andrew Oldham's idea to get Mick and Keith writing, and I think it was quite clear that Brian didn't have the necessary talent to write songs.
Brian, I think, felt a little bit hurt, so he was sort of pushing himself into the front there, but not quite making it somehow.
There was something fundamentally wrong with Brian. He was impossible sometimes, and I think that this increased to the point where he became a liability.
This drug taking and this kind of raving of his. So the relationship deteriorated, and I know that in studio time sometimes the band would have a microphone in front of Brian's guitar, but the microphone would not be turned on, you know, and Brian defeated himself.
I was always very fond of Brian. I really liked him, but he was infuriating. And what was sad about it, I mean, it used to make me sad to see Mick and Keith, you know, taking the mickey out of him, and I'm going to say this, they belittled him, you know, and that was sad in a way, because he started the band. You know, would they have done it?
You're so cold, you're so cruel, I'm your man, not your foe.
Brian Jones's deterioration was as swift as it was complete. After being ousted from the group, he died within months on July the 2nd, 1969. But the curse that seems to afflict everyone who comes into contact with Mick and Keith didn't stop there.
Andrew had personal problems of his own, and he was having certain treatments, and at that time the Stones were getting into heavier drugs. And we were warned that if Andrew continued to take what he was taking, which was prescribed, they would bust him.
The band had achieved a fame, a status within our culture and society that was quite remarkable, really. And they were becoming harder to work with from Andrew's point of view. It was becoming very frustrating in the recording studio, and I spent quite a lot of time in the recording studio. Sessions would supposedly start at 10:30, and the band wouldn't turn up, or at least Mick and Keith wouldn't turn up until 2:30 in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning. They'd be very out of it, they'd be quite aggressive, there'd be no preparation. It was a difficult and uncomfortable time.
The relationship between Andrew and Mick was disintegrating very, very peacefully, in that Mick was going his way with here comes the Satanic Majesties. And Andrew was beginning to realize that he had to be careful, because otherwise he would just fall apart as a human being. And Mick obviously realized this, and without any any word said, he just went on his own way.
So once again, Mick decided a change in management was due. He called in the American Alan Klein to try and improve their finances. At the same time, with the group struggling to stay together, Mick set himself a fresh challenge, this time as an actor. By the end of the 60s, with the rock world at his feet, his image and fame ensured, and his position at the head of the band intact, Mick decided to broaden his horizons and embrace the visual medium of film. First came some groundbreaking promotional films.
The Stones liked Radio City Together, they liked me, and so they asked me to do their first video, which was Jumping Jack Flash. And this was the original Rolling Stones with Brian Jones. And we did it. We shot a couple of versions. And I think maybe Brian, maybe Mick, maybe Keith, someone started to put stuff on. And it was an idea which just seemed to grow. I'd like to take credit for all good ideas in the world, but I think that one just sort of turned up.
I was raised by two left-footed hags. I was schooled with stripes right across my back. But it's alright. Back in the gap. But it's alright. Every cat flash is in that gap.
With such a stunning visual appeal, Mick's move to acting seemed an obvious one. Through his links with Cafe Society friends like Donald Cammell and Christopher Gibbs, Mick embarked on his most creative yet most dangerous project to date, the cult movie Performance, shot in the seedy environs of London's Notting Hill.
The original title of the film was called The Liars, and Donald came to the idea of performance, I think, through he saw both characters as performers. So the title grew out of that and the fact that Mick, was a great performer.
Sandy Lieberson was a wonderful producer because he let things, and when there's a line in the film, I just let things happen. And it was very much that way on the set.
And Mick was aware of it at a very early stage. He knew that it was being written for him. There were numerous discussions between Mick and Donald as to what the character could embody and what the role could potentially be like. So there was a great deal of collaboration.
I think it was emotionally challenging for everybody because it was, it happened almost by accident.
It became something more than just a normal movie set because the relationships became so intense and you couldn't separate professional from personal. The set continued when the film wrapped for the day. People didn't separate and go home to their families and hot meals. It was a 24-hour-a-day film set.
The movie's influence deeply affected the band. While Jagger acted out intimate love scenes with Anita Pallenberg, her real-life lover Keith Richards waited outside in his car, unable to believe or confront what was going on inside.
I mean, after the whole thing was over, we had a lot of problems with it because I remember one scene that they were on the bath together and I think the head of the studio at the time said, "Even the bath water's dirty."
Mick brought a lot of his own personality and also, I think, probably using other personalities to create a screen personality. So I wouldn't say it's just Mick Jagger up there. There's an attitude that's Mick's, but I think his creation of that character was something that he came to as an actor. And I think that's what distinguishes that performance in performance.
Once it was done, it couldn't have been done by anybody else. Nobody, because it belonged to him in that way. It belonged because he'd brought so much innate understanding and trust to it, and gave himself to it. And that's quite daring, and very daring. People that give themselves to anything completely. He did that. The ultimate performance is his work. There are very few actors that have ever held an audience of 60,000 people. When you say, can he act? Yeah, that's the ultimate actor. is someone that is giving totally something of themselves, I think.
30 years on, performance remains Mick's greatest screen moment. Although he's tried, rather too often in films like Ned Kelly and Freejack, to match it, it's a desire that still remains. After performance, Mick had to return to the Rolling Stones, and it was difficult. Despite all the success of the 60s, the huge record sales and the massive fame, there was actually no money in the Stones' bank accounts. Mick's personal press agent, Keith Oldham, knew the truth.
I think people were unaware of the fact that the Stones were not really rich until the mid-70s. They'd had enormous success both in America and in England by 1970, but behind them lay a legal dispute with their first manager, Eric Easton, who was in league with Andrew Oldham. Then Andrew Oldham exited, there was another legal dispute going on there. Then in came Alan Klein, that became a legal dispute, all before 1970. So all their monies were being held up in escrow in respect of sorting out who actually was owed what. And consequently, the only real money that they had coming in was from live performance. They were bankrupt. They owed huge amounts of money.
The dire financial situation of the band meant two things. Firstly, they fled British taxation and based themselves in the south of France. And secondly, they had to build up their revenue. Through massive tours, mainly in the USA, they soon became the highest-earning band on the planet. Mick Taylor was Brian Jones's replacement for this new era in the Stones' story.
I did get the sense that I was getting involved in a situation where it was like sort of phase 2 of their career, if you like. They'd been very successful, they'd done a couple of American tours, but they hadn't worked for a couple of years. And so, as fate would have it, the concert in Hyde Park sort of turned into a sort of requiem for Brian Jones. I saw some backstage footage recently of the Hyde Park show, and there's a lot in this footage of Mick sort of giving everybody directions and saying, right, I'm going to go on stage, and then I'm going to do this, and then this is going to happen, and then this is going to happen, and then we're going to do this. And so, yeah, he was always very much in control. Touring had basically changed during that period between 66 and 69. Because of new technology and huge PA systems, it was possible for bands to, play in big arenas and actually hear themselves play.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Rolling Stones!
By 1972, we'd become more of a celebrity band. I mean, we had actors and actresses and writers like Truman Capote on the plane, and so it became like a Hello magazine, in a way.
The Stones at that time were trying to regenerate their money. There was a lot of money made on the tours, but more than ever, it really helped expand the sales of their albums.
I don't think music belongs in stadiums. It's not very good, acoustically speaking. It's not very good for the participatory aspect. It becomes like, Goebbels events, like Nuremberg rally, and you know what I mean? It's like it's manipulative, and I don't think it's generous. I think it's self-serving. It all like leads to the glorification of vanity. I play to 2 million people. If I play 3 million people, 5 million people, it's. From the point of view of the music, it's disappointing. But it became a business, and perhaps music and art was always a business.
Increasingly, in a world of backstage passes and VIP areas, the Stones built up their own band of followers and recruited their own trusty lieutenants. Marshall Chess, who Mick had hero worshipped as a teenager, now ran their own record label.
The Rolling Stones live in their own world. And once you enter into that world, the outside reality begins to fade. Everyone kisses your ass in the Rolling Stones world. And I'm sure they don't even realize it, because when you're in it, you don't realize it. It's only when you're out looking in. You're staying up all night. At that time, everyone's, smoking cigarettes, taking an assortment of drugs to sleep, party, stay up, catching planes, traveling around. It's not the healthiest life. It's not for the weak-hearted.
Everything was done to excess, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And I think there have been maybe 3 or 4 times when they've come close to calling it a day. But I think because of Mick's sheer ambitiousness and persistence, he kept the whole thing together, and then they started to tour again. And when they realised what a huge commercial venture that could be, I think that's what kept them together, really.
I think Mick really learnt by trial and error. He learnt from painful experience. He was somebody who had to actually run into brick walls and find out that the people that he trusted or had empowered with financial abilities couldn't do it, or didn't do it, or ripped them off, or stole, or whatever. So he then realised he had to take the matter over himself because he was the only person he could trust.
So, after Alan Klein, Mick effectively became the Stones manager himself, combining his love of money and aristocracy in one easy go by employing Prince Rupert of Lowenstein to act as financial guru. The result is the global corporation that is the Rolling Stones today.
Once he'd bought the dream of, I'm going to be Mick Jagger superstar, he wanted to be Mick Jagger, not just millionaire, but mega millionaire.
Once you get the kind of money that Mick Jagger has now got, you're a tycoon. You're running a corporation. You're running a massive industry that is Mick is a sort of skinny Rupert Murdoch.
I was flipping magazines in that place on Mercer Street.
I think Mick loves money. I think he loves power. I think he's motivated very heavily by money. Of course he likes the attention. He likes the adulation. He likes the fame. He admits to it.
Anybody say, nobody say,
money means things to him. I wish he'd spread a bit more of it around in other directions. He should think of it like fertilizer to make things grow, other than those things which are just for himself.
And it would be great if some of this money would go back into the pockets of some of these old guys, the blues guys, without whom this music just couldn't have existed. And some of them still struggling. Some don't have teeth. Some of them don't have health insurance. It would have been really great if the Stones could have done a sort of foundation for the blues. It's show business. It's become show business. And that show business thing was what we were rebelling against at the very beginning of this entire thing. It's a phenomenon that perhaps was inevitable. As if they hadn't done it, somebody else would have done it. But my critique is of what they are doing with it, where this has ended up. And I don't think it has ended up where it should have ended up somehow.
But of course, when Mick does spread the money around, he does it on a grand scale. In 1985, when Bob Geldof was planning Band Aid, it was inevitable that he would call on Mick as the greatest rock performer to help.
I went to Mick and he said, look, there's a lot of rows with the Stones at the moment, we're not getting on, and et cetera, et cetera. And I said, well, will you do it? And he said, yeah, okay. And from that moment, he put so much into it. I mean, people don't quite realise. They think, oh, it's easy, Jagger, just shut up. It wasn't that at all. Bowie was pretty much involved. So Mick went over to America, put a band together. Then he came back. They went off that night and did Dancing in the Street. The definitive version, in my opinion. I mean, these two old tarts, you know, trying to outdo each other. And then went straight into making a video. We had another number one.
Across the nation, a chance for folks to meet. Laughing and singing and music swinging, dancing in the street, Philadelphia, PA. Oldham on the now. Don't forget the Motor City, on the streets of Brazil, back in the USSR.
There was so much effort and so much commitment. You know, I'll always remember that and appreciate it, you know.
Dancing in the Street showed Mick in a new light. His relationship with Bowie both delighted and intrigued fans. However, it is his relationship with Keith Richards that holds the key to the success and the enduring work rate of the Stones. At the centre of the Stones is a partnership between two disparate characters. Mick and Keith shared the same roots, but ironically, it is their distance that makes the formula such a winning one. They may have periods when one is not talking to the other, but they complement each other perfectly. Jagger can play the country gentleman. However, he can never get too elevated because Richard's street urchin will pull him back down to earth. And if Mick is too tired for late nights, there's no chance that Keith will pass on an invitation to party or play the blues through till dawn. Keith also gives the Stones their greatest gift, their musical credibility, and a spontaneous counterpoint to the more controlled structure that Jagger likes to create.
The best music comes when it just seems to flow and just drip off your fingers and you're not really thinking too much. You're just doing it, you know? And afterwards you can think about it and argue about it and all that blah, blah, blah. When you're doing it, it's flowing, you know? And that's all that counts. Catch the accidents as they happen in the studio. Nobody would think of putting that note against that note, except it happened. And as long as you don't stop and say, start again, you know, just let it go, let it go. You haven't made a mistake, you've just discovered something new, you know. Mick will probably say totally the opposite, and of course, yin and yang.
These people are joined at the hip. They're like siblings. They have sibling rivalries. Jagger really needs Richards. Richards gives him a certain that Lennon gave McCartney, and more to the point, Richards really needs Jagger because Richards cannot sing. Richards sings like Tom Waits dead.
I used to talk to Bill Wyman a lot about my frustrations because he felt the same kind of frustrations too, and he said, well, you know, it's, you know, basically you just got to go along with the flow, and you've got to accept that this is the way Mick and Keith work.
I was lucky. Tell me how I changed.
That's another thing about Mick. He always had this competitiveness, you know, and he always kept his ear quite, you know, close to the ground. He always took a great deal of interest in what other people were doing and what other songs were in the charts. And one song in particular I remember was It's Only Rock and Roll But I Like It, because he came into the studio and he said, oh, I just heard this fantastic Slade song. He said, I want to write a song like that, like an anthem.
It's only rock and roll, but I like it. And I know it's only rock and roll.
after 30-odd years, you listen to the words and the lyrics of the Stones thing, it's very poppy. So they really got stuck in the groove of being these sort of like pop format songwriters. And if you listen to the stuff now, this kind of hits you somehow or other. There was a band that was rebelling in the sense, shaking up the foundations of the popular music scene 30 years ago, which has ended up being the pop scene.
But although Mick and Keith, the Glimmer twins, may be inextricably linked, now Mick can move on to his solo projects without causing the disharmony that Performance did. In 1998, he surprised people by taking a cameo role in the low-budget art house movie Bent.
Streets of Berlin, I must leave you soon. Oh, will you forget me? 'Cause I never really hear.
I wanted somebody who wasn't a traditional actor to play this part of Greta, who's a drag queen, and, well, I wanted an icon, really, and somebody who was a performer, somebody who had a charisma.
Where the boys are pretty. Take out his eyes, he never needs see how they eat you alive in this city.
Actually, it was Martin Sherman who wrote Bent. It was his idea to approach Mick. I suppose I was a bit fearful, but I said, "Oh, what the hell? Let's offer it to him because he'll never do it." And then, amazingly, he said yes.
Streets of Berlin, will you cry out if I vanish into thin air?
I think he supported the ideology of the film, definitely. I think that he supported, the fact that the film is speaking on behalf of the liberation of minorities, and in particular, in this instance, gay men. And I think he supported that as a philosophy. Acting is to do with intelligence, personality, and a willingness to create a character. And Mick certainly obviously has the intelligence and the personality. I think that what was so touching about working with him in Bent was that he wanted to be an actor. He wanted to join in.
I think it was very hard for him to be an actor because of the posters on people's walls. Because one of the things about being an actor, essentially, is you're pretending you're someone else. And if everybody knows for damn sure who you are, and you're the greatest rock and roll star in the world, it's very hard to convince them that you're another character.
I think he needs a vehicle, and he needs a director who knows how to get the best out of him and how to approach directing him. So I don't think, his acting potential was ever fulfilled.
Andrew Oldham once said to me that it's because he's trapped by his own persona. It's very difficult for him to be anybody else.
His heart is in his music, I think, and in his own personal theatre, his shows, his tours, and his concerts and his things. That's really who he is.
The other thing that the world needs convincing about is how much longer Mick can keep it up. It's a question he asked best himself.
Welcome the Rolling Stones. I want to ask the Rolling Stones a very original question. Is this going to be your last tour?
And of course he answers the question himself every night of the tour.
I don't think there's any drug stronger than the energy of 20 or 30,000 people being in love with you and keeping in beat with the music, which locks it together.
Mick just gets a charge out of entertaining and singing. I don't really think it's something he can do without, otherwise he wouldn't still be doing it.
He moved like a guy 16. That's one thing. He's a great performer. That's what he is. Great performer.
What was a teenage rhythm and blues outfit in 1964 has now become the Mick Jagger and Keith Richards global rock and roll travelling circus.
I think it's a showman. It's a minor art, perhaps, in that sense, but it is not. It's a stage art. And I think that he certainly is not Jim Morrison in terms of metaphysical and literary interests, you know. I don't think he's invented anything as such. He's a very good synthesizer. He's taken things from a little bit everywhere. He's always been truthful to his lips, you know, to his... That he has been, right? That's difficult not to, you know.
He gets such a lot of stick from the media, as do the rest of the Stones, for being sort of wrinkly old guys, you know, sort of leathery old faces and sort of parodying their earlier performances. And I think it's really a bit unfair. The sort of ageist thing that seems to apply to mature rock stars is a bit unfair. And for me, the Stones have grown into these faces. You know, Mick Jagger, the way he looks now, is the way I think of him. I don't think of Mick Jagger as he was when I was at school and I first saw him on television. I think of Mick Jagger, the sort of leathery, crinkly kind of guy that he is, you know, as the rest of the Stones are. Sort of Mount Rushmore with attitude.
I mean, he defined being a pop singer star. Like, there was Elvis, and then there were a couple of people who defined guitars. That would be Keith and Pete Townsend. And then there was singers, and Mick was the singer.
Something organic happens in front of your eyes. A relationship is formed between performer and audience in front of your eyes. And Mick Jagger obviously is someone who's an ultimate performer in that sense, that he can incite an audience to respond to his outrageous behaviour.
I think he deliberately created a confused and androgynous sexual image when he was young. The Rolling Stones and he took risks, and they took on authority, and they took on issues that involved civil rights and sexual intolerance and political hypocrisy. Later, into the 70s, it became something else that really wasn't sociologically relevant.
When they look at the Stones and say, live karaoke session, recycling the old stuff, they're not really paying attention. It's not the same every night. It's an ongoing, newly achieving situation.
The Stones, when they play like they can play, the whole stadium is reduced to a club. That's a cliche, but that music is what it does. There is no other band in the world, there's no rock and roll band can create that sensation, that feeling inside you.
There is something about the man that has captured and encapsulated the feelings of several generations of people. You can find better singers, you can find better musicians, you can find better dancers, you can find better songwriters, but you won't find a better Mick Jagger.